Pleasure to welcome you all here today. Focus on mergers and acquisitions in the region. And we will have a Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. So you can either raise your hand and ask questions live, or you can ask your questions in the Q&A box or the chat. And we will try and go through, hopefully manage to go through all those questions. So let me introduce, first of all, our moderator, Camilla Bullock, and she is the Director General for Emerging Payment Association Asia Pacific, and also a director on our board for the Swedish Australian Chamber of Commerce. So welcome, Camilla. Handing over to you.
Excellent. Pleasure to be here today. And mergers and acquisitions and how to go local in a region that is so fragmented as the APAC region. That's something that I get a lot of questions from the member in the Emerging Payment Association, it's a different industry, but the same topic, as well as I'm involved in a consultancy that helps fintechs to come to this region, because it is a very big region. I have people coming to me and saying, yeah, we're going to focus on Southeast Asia. And if you're looking at just in one country in South Asia, like Indonesia, that has 277 million people, 8.5% of the world's population, it's big countries, but that's also why it's so exciting. And that's why we're having this topic here today. So I'm delighted to introduce to you the panel of today. No, first I want to know who's actually on this call, so we can know a little bit of what we should focus into. And that's what we're missing, isn't it? I mean, it's exciting when you are in a room and can see faces, but now we're from all over APAC, and I think we have some Swedish people also on the line. So Camilla, could you help me to raise the poll question so we get to know a little bit about the audience? So please answer this question and we'll see why you are here today. What is the interest that you have in M&A? Do you have a general interest, or your daily work is related to M&A? Or is this an area which is becoming more important in your business? No, can you share the result then?
Have an interest is 63%, and work with M&A on a daily basis, 11%. And this is an area which is becoming more important in my business, that's 26%.
Okay, excellent, thank you. That is sort of what I expected, and hopefully can move more into that area to see the importance of M&A. So the panel today, we have Ola from Anticimex, who is in the middle of this world. So I just asked him coming on to the call, he's done 70 deals in the APAC region since 2013. So he has a lot of insight to share, probably both about what not to do, but a lot about also what to do. Enrique from Electrolux has also done this for many years. Now he's the CFO in the APAC region, CFO in sales, but he still has the people who's dealing with the M&A from Electrolux on a daily basis coming to him with questions and showing him what deals they are looking into. So a little bit more maybe bird view than what Ola has. And then we have Martin Ekberg from Team Sweden, and he is the global head or global lead of the M&A activity within Team Sweden. So Martin, maybe you can share a few slides to set the scene for this conversation.
Absolutely. I will try to share my screen. Hang on. My screen?
Yes. And I also meant to say Business Sweden, not Team Sweden, but we're all on the same team here. So
exactly. No, we are part of the Team Sweden, though. The embassy, the Swedish Chamber of Commerce, and Business Sweden. That's Team Sweden. So that was certainly a good introduction as well. Yeah. So thank you, everyone. It's great to be part of this session today. Like Camilla said, I'm Business Sweden's global M&A lead, and it's certainly a growing area of interest for us since we are trying to help Swedish companies achieve global growth. And when we look at growth, it's of course inorganic growth as well as organic growth. So it's two parts of the equation. I will try to give a brief overview of some of the key drivers for M&A in APAC. Of course, it's a quite daunting task given the limited time we have here today. But nevertheless, I have compiled a few slides highlighting some of the key trends as well as some of the observations that we've seen so far. Let me just first kick off by looking at the global M&A activity. And I think it's very important to say that M&A is increasingly becoming important. So there's been some, obviously, less activities normally correlates with a downturn. But what we see straight after a downturn is actually a deal acceleration. So a lot of companies trying to reposition themselves for future growth, as well as acquiring new capabilities. So this has been true for the tech bubble, for the financial crisis, for the Euro crisis, and we also forecast it to be true after the pandemic. We have already started to see an increase in deal activity coming out of sort of the low point during 2020. All right, but if we double click on APAC, I guess that's why we're here today. And I think it's important to say that when we talk about deal activity in APAC, I mean, the data doesn't lie. It's actually very clear. We do see an increase. So if we look at the global deal activity 2006, APAC accounted for nearly 12% of the global deal activity. But if we turn to 2020, even though that was a sort of a low point year in terms of activity, the deal activity in APAC, this region, accounted for a bit over 26%. So obviously, it's growing in importance for the region. If we then look at some of the trends, and I guess this is it's important to say that this is non-exhaustive. Obviously, there's a lot of different trends, but we wanted to highlight first two trends, and they are sort of APAC specific. And I understand, given the group of people attending today, I'm kicking in some open doors now, but Asia Pacific is the engine of global growth. And it's something that is worth stressing. Also, if we look at the second trend, I was struggling a bit with labeling this one, but what we want to convey with this second one is that we look at Swedish companies, we look at companies with head office outside the region. They are trying to reposition themselves. They're trying to catch up. They're trying to increase their footprint into this region. I'll come back and demonstrate that one a bit more in detail. The two other trends that we want to highlight is glocal instead of global. This is, of course, a trend that's been trending or growing in importance over the last few decades. But after the pandemic, this trend has really picked up. We do see a shift to local and more regionalized operations. And then lastly, the fourth and final one that we want to highlight today is the race to acquire tech capabilities. And I mean, when we look at M&A, there are different strategic imperatives for M&A, but what we do see in the last 5-10 years is a huge increase in scope deals. Companies going out, acquiring technology companies, trying to improve their digital capabilities and not only market share. All right, so if we just double click a bit on the first one, Asia Pacific as the engine for global growth, like I said, I know I kick in some open doors, but it's just important to stress that, you know, already in 2010, APAC accounted for over 30% of global GDP. And in 2030, the region is expected to account over 40% of global GDP. But even more important, 60% of the global growth. So obviously, if you're not present in the region, you will struggle to achieve significant growth. US, Europe, and rest of the world are in a decline, as you can see. And the potential of the APAC region can easily be demonstrated by considering the sheer population. So already in 2020, 60% of the global population resides here in this region. If we then move on to what I would call the Swedish catch-up, the second trend, and I think this is, if you look at the left-hand side of the slide, you see APAC's share of GDP. We've already looked at that number, but you can see that it's from 1990 it was 90%, 2010 it was 28%, and 2030, like I said, it's 40%. If we look at Swedish exports to the region, and here's important to have a small caveat. Obviously, export is not enough. You have to look, take into account global sales, sales that are actually conducted in the region. At the same time, that holds true for the other regions as well. So, for the sake of doing the comparison, we've chosen to highlight Swedish export figures. As you can see, they are quite not on par when it comes to global GDP, and I think that's why we see an increase of M&A into the region, inbound M&A, companies trying to increase their foothold in this region. Obviously, for 2030, we are hoping that the Swedish footprint will become even bigger. So that's obviously something that we hope for. We can also look at inbound M&A, and as a further proof to my point, we see that the total M&A activity during 2020 declined with nearly 7% for 2020. And you see some dramatic declines in North America and other regions. But if you look at APAC, despite being a low year for M&A deal activity on a global level, inbound M&A, meaning companies from the outside of the region acquiring companies in the region, increased by 8%. If we then move on to our third trend, so accelerated regionalization is driving M&A activity. So if we go back a few decades and we start at the 90s, I mean, there was an acceleration in terms of globalization. Everyone knows this. It was, we talked about outsourcing, we had mega factories, we had global supply chains. But there's been a shift, and it's not only the pandemic that has driven this shift, but the shift already started roughly 2005, where we saw a clear shift in terms of companies' focus. Domestic consumption, for example, consumption in China picked up. It was more important to have local ecosystems, and lately it's been very much important to have regional supply chains in order to improve a company's resilience. So if we then look at the data for India and China, and we start to look at the first years between 1995 to 2005, we clearly see the trend. So the graph might be a bit complex, but if we look at it, it actually demonstrates gross exports as share of gross output, meaning that the things that were produced in China went out of China and away for export. Then after 2005, there's a clear shift, and we start to see a trend of the things that were produced became more and more used within these countries. So what happens now, and why is that important for M&A? Well, if you can think about an example of having a factory between 1995 and 2005, that was quite easy. But when a company now starts to need to adhere to and service local customers, there's a growing need to forward and backward integration. It's need to acquire, and it's a need to expand its footprint, and that's why M&A comes into play. If we look at the fourth and final trend, I mentioned scope and scale deals. So scope deals are the deals that we talk about, acquiring tech capabilities, digital capabilities, new capabilities that can complement your core business and strengthen your competitive advantages. So if you look at global deals, this is not just APAC deals, but if you look at global deals, so 2015 scope deals, aka tech deals and digital deals, accounted for 41% of total deals. And in 2020, you see the trend is clear. 56% of global deals were in fact scope deals. And if we then look at our region, I think it's also important to stress that it is a region with some significant tech capabilities and local ecosystems. And this actually needs to be said, that companies that want to be competitive in this region should tap into these local ecosystems in order to improve their position and competitiveness. And as you can see here, that 6 of the highest ranked startup ecosystems globally are found in APAC today. So to conclude, 4 major trends that we want to highlight today: the Asia Pacific as the engine for global growth. Companies with head office outside the region are trying to catch up and increasingly trying to grow their footprint in the region, and local instead of global, and the race to acquire tech capabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's giving us a very good overview why we're actually running this webinar to start off with. It's an important topic, and we are in a very exciting region. I'm going to start with Enrique, because you've been talking M&A for many years now at Electrolux, but also when you were at ASSA before. So despite what's happening now in the economy in general, can you give us your view? Why is it important for Swedish companies to be active in M&A?
Yeah, thank you, Camilla. Yes, and thanks for that introduction. I think there are the kind of economic trends that Martin was referring to, and I think it's very important. I mean, I think most of you know them, right? I mean, large population getting richer, living longer, aspiring, more educated, and so on, and also wanting more sustainable solutions. So there is that kind of trend for the APAC or Asia side, I should rather say. But then you have the kind of our home markets, Sweden or Northern Europe or whatever it may be, where we have a kind of inherently lower economic growth. So I think the success here, if you look at your success of your company for a bit longer term than just a budget year, I think that you really need to get your hands dirty and look at the opportunities that are in Asia available for you. And there I think that I see kind of many Swedish companies having, especially kind of in the size 500 million SEK to say 5 to 10 billion SEK size, is that they're kind of a bit slow in my view, and we would need to do a bit of catch up. I think Martin was referring to some statistics on that, but I think it's that demand trend that for Asia that becomes very important. Secondly, tapping into cost base here that can be a very important competitive advantage. But then lastly, technologies that come out of this region that I think as well Martin was referring to, and that where many companies can capitalize on. I mean, I just give you an example from Electrolux. For many categories, say refrigeration or air conditioners, Asia is by far more advanced than other such products in other places in the world. So those would be kind of the main reasons why I think, and speaking as from a Swedish standpoint, but of course this would be valid almost regardless, whatever European or North American or any other region you would be looking at, Asia becoming increasingly important.
Yeah, you capture a little piece of the market and you have a lot. But I agree with this that it can be hard and a bit daunting where to start, where and how and who. But Ola, you have a bit of experience in this now. So can you just tell us a little bit about the last couple of years of what you've done and what the strategy has been around that?
Yes, so we entered the Pacific region back in 2013 when we acquired a business that had operations both in a number of countries in Europe, but also Australia and Singapore. And since then, we also entered the Asian market in 2016, starting out in Singapore and then followed by Malaysia and Cambodia. And these markets, both the Pacific and in Asia, have historically been very fragmented, so enabling a huge M&A opportunity for us. So we've done a total of, as you mentioned, 70 acquisitions in Pacific and Asia combined. So in Australia, this has taken us to the #1 position through almost 40 transactions since back in 2013. And in Singapore, similarly, as we just entered 5 years ago, we've also taken the number one position from the incumbent that had been there as a market leader for more than 40 years. And I think similar to many other companies, we enter a new market by acquiring what we call a platform, so which is one of the market leaders that has a strong backbone and processes in place, and that has the ability to absorb further bolt-ons down the line. And I think our market has been very resilient throughout the pandemic, and it's actually performed even better than the years leading up to the pandemic. But this uncertainty has triggered many entrepreneurs to kind of reconsider their life and their choice to be entrepreneurs, and causing a lot of uncertainty for them. So we're very active right now, and we're also very optimistic about the coming years.
Interesting. But if you look back at 2013, when you did your first acquisition, and you look at how you think about it now, can you do some comparisons for the people on the line that's sitting there, and should we go down this route? Are we doing the right decision? Just compare a little bit how you're thinking then and now.
I think in general, when we started doing acquisitions, we didn't have as much of a solid plan for each market as we have now. So now when we enter a new market, we would have done extensive research on each market and identified the key players, and then pursuing them kind of systematically, and not just starting off with any transaction, but rather making sure that we find the right entry acquisition into a market. That is very important for us, because if we go wrong from the beginning, I think that can create a lot of problems down the line. So we learn to kind of focus on identifying that right first acquisition.
Yeah, that's interesting, because when we had our pre-chat preparing a bit for this session, so yeah, that's what we do. So it's not staged, but we had a chat like, where do we come from? What's the background? Enrique, you said something really interesting, this that you need to secure your pipeline. You shouldn't just go out and date one company when you're looking at what is your next partner in the region. Can you compare a little bit? Tell us a little bit more about what are the key ingredients to get started?
Yeah, I mean, maybe Camilla, just to add what Ola just said, is that I think what for Anticimex, for example, is really about getting the first deal really right, because then you are in a much better kind of situation to kind of bolt on. So I think it is not looking at the first kind of market entry as in isolation. That becomes your platform where you can kind of add on more things. So it might kind of look at that deal in isolation as an expensive one, but when looking at it from the angle of what else could I possibly do, what options that is open up for me, then it can be really value creative. But in terms of the kind of having many deals in the pipeline, I think it's a very kind of almost saying it's about statistics, almost like, right? It's about probabilities. I mean, with us, when we were running at around 15 to 20 deals per year, we were saying that it's about 1 in 20 that we succeed with. So then it means that we were saying, as leading an M&A team, is really saying 95% of our time is a waste of time. The problem is that we don't know which 95% it is. So we just need to ensure that we have, and that is really after working hard in terms of securing, are we really working on the right things? But the value of the knowledge that you get from having multiple conversations, and where you can cross-reference, what are 5 competitors in the same country telling you about themselves and about each other. You can't really buy that from whoever is the kind of industry information gathering body for your industry. So I think that getting that right, getting the kind of that engagement becomes really important. I would say almost get one Ola Nordh or a few on board would be main advice here.
Martin, is that what you're telling people when they come to you and they're saying, what should I have for strategy here? Get an Ola, but more serious. I'm tying back to it, what both Ola and Enrique is saying around how to get the first deal in and to build a pipeline, but then tying back to what you said about the scope deals and acquiring technology. That's a question that I get a lot also, and people come to me and say, what is the technology trend in those countries? What advice would you say to to people to figure out where to start? Where do they look for their targets?
Yeah, that's that's a good question. I think one need to first take a step back and ask, yourself, what do we want to achieve with your acquisition? So if we look at large companies already present in a market or a region, it might become more important to find, small niche players that can complement their value offering and service offering today, so that they can actually scale that niche company or niche technology in the global channels and so that they become more competitive. What Ola is referring to, a platform acquisition, that's important when you start to enter a market. What should the strategy be to going forward into this market? Should we enter Japan or not? And when we enter Japan, in what way or form should we do it? So in those instances, it's obviously very important to have an idea of a platform acquisition. And that platform acquisition can be both large, but it can also be small, and it can be the foothold that you can provide and drive a roll-up strategy later on. So it depends on what the strategic imperative is for the acquisition.
And what we have done at Anticimex is that we have designed such M&A objectives and criteria individually for all the countries that we're in, and also in Australia, also within each region. So we have different objectives from doing M&A in Malaysia as opposed to in New Zealand or Singapore or Australia.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask. Thank you. It's almost to find that matrix, where to first, where do I get most bang for my bucks fast. To do things like this, Enrique, I'm turning back to you as having lots of experience in this. Do you need to have an in-house specialist?
Yeah, I kind of almost, we're alluding to it before, right? Yes, in-house specialists, yes, very important. And I would say, look at people that have, and I would say generally there are two types. The types that kind of can drive this internally, go and create engagement and drive projects. But it can also be someone that has been for a long time, knows the industry really well, can create relationships. Because I think one of the kind of biggest mistakes is that we are super careful and see this as a big mystery box and don't reach out to target company owners or boards or whatever level that may need be. So I think having in-house competence on that is you need someone to drive it. Then the technical solution around how do you structure it, valuation, tax considerations, and so on, that can always be sorted out and outsourced. And there are many specialists in that area, in those areas.
Good. That's good. So there is, get started is what I'm hearing. So if we don't get started, we'll get nowhere with it. Ola, just coming back to you a little bit when we're talking the strategies, and it's something that I'm very interested in, and I see also many of the mergers and acquisitions that are happening in the region are around communication or technology or digitalization. So we can see that what Martin was alluding to, scope deals. How much has that played part of your strategy?
So we will only be doing what we call the scale deals, what Martin referred to as the scale deals. So acquiring additional volume and other capabilities, but digitalization has huge impact on our M&A agenda regardless, because our industry is in the middle of a significant technological shift. So we're moving away from using various kinds of poison to using digital pest control services. And we have developed our own proprietary global market leading pest control technology. And this kind of increased specialization makes it very hard for small entrepreneurs to compete with us, because we have our technology and they have the same chemicals that they've been using for decades. And this is something that both kind of excites them and terrifies them at the same time. So I think one of the benefits and one thing that we have to bring to entrepreneurs caused by digitalization is that when they join us, they can get access to our technology and offer that to their customers more or less immediately, and working, continuing as individual entrepreneurs. They would never be able to compete with us in the long term. So in that sense, we make scale deals. So we want to acquire volume of high quality customers where we can roll out our own smart technology. So the benefit for us here is that we have a clear value creation path for each transaction that's not based on primarily cost synergies, but actually offering something new and unique to the customers of the companies that we acquired. So big impact for us, but we do not acquire any technology.
Oh, that's an interesting take. That's why it's interesting. It's so different from industry to industry, what you operate in, what sector. And the same is actually when we're talking about chemicals. We talked about regulations in a prep call. What does regulations mean for mergers and acquisitions? And what do you have to be prepared for in this space? So Martin, do you want to share a little bit about how acquirers are thinking around regulation, or what they should think about?
Yes. Well, when it comes to regulation, I think it's important to divide regulations into different, groups. There are, of course, typical industry regulations, and that may vary cross sectors. So Ola is looking to have a more regulated market potentially. And if you're in fintech, the local market regulations might differ from Australia to Singapore to Japan, for example. But what we've seen in the last, say, since the pandemic started, we do see more of these government regulations coming into play, much stronger than we saw previously. And these government regulations are then focusing on strategic assets such as infrastructure, such as resources, etc., etc. I forgot the name now, but we had one of these cases in Australia where a Chinese company wanted to acquire a dairy producer in Australia, and the government de facto turned that deal down just because they didn't want to lose that dairy production. They saw that as a strategic asset. So it very much depends on in which market you operate in and what the scope of the acquisition is. If you're treading into more strategic areas, then you need to be very mindful of if there are government regulations that you need to consider.
Yeah, I guess it's one also, like, as it's being such a fragmented region, all the regulators are so different if they clear or not. So it's one, how they operate in Malaysia is very different from Indonesia or from Singapore. Again, like if you have those clear directives, so you know how, if the future is certain or not. But definitely one they can get help with on the ground. Enrique, back to one of those more broader questions. So with the experience you have, could you call out some pitfalls that you would like to call out, that if companies are embarking on this road, what should they watch out for?
Well, I think first, not daring to reach out. And I think if I kind of link that to what Ola was saying before around being clear of what's the value that you bring. In their case about technology. And if you join Anticimex, in a sense, this is Anticimex becomes an endorser of your kind of growth strategy that you have, without exactly knowing how that conversation goes. But I think kind of knowing Ola is essentially selling something, in those conversations. So reaching out and kind of before buying anything, you need to actually sell. And then I would say, secondly, not being clear on your value creation plan, being very clear on your integration, the synergies, in what order will you do that. If I give you an example from Electrolux, I think it's very easy to go wrong, where we kind of, as a large company, can easily kill much smaller companies, because simply we have experts, if I can call it, not that many colleagues from Electrolux are listening into this, that essentially are specialists in their fields and want to immediately take ownership of certain topics. And lastly, paying too much, that's generally irreversible. So I think thinking through kind of payment structure, incentives, different payment mechanisms, and so on becomes really important. I think that one is it's hard to fix. Synergies you can always go and fix and say we need a new direction and go and work on it.
Yeah, thank you. I had something ringing here, that's why I jumped away. Ola, please.
I agree on all of those points, and I think one more mistake is to not leverage all the local knowledge that you have in your organization. So I will never know, and no one in Stockholm will know the Malaysian market better than our Malaysian MD and the Malaysian team. So all the knowledge that they have about the competition, about their market, and the entire business, custom and culture context, they will all know that better. So I think we must find an M&A model where that is kind of all that knowledge is captured and incorporated and used throughout the whole M&A process from origination to integration.
Do you find is that the same? The key to success, is that the same in different countries, or have you seen different flavors depending on if you're in North Asia, Southeast, or?
So we have, we have a very strict M&A process itself, the internal process that doesn't differ at all among our markets. But how we engage with the entrepreneurs differs, very much so. And so we have an entirely decentralized M&A model with local ownership, meaning that the managing director in Malaysia is responsible for screening his entire market, setting his own M&A objectives and criteria. So what do we want to achieve with making acquisitions in Malaysia? And depending on the opportunity in Malaysia, what criteria can we set for these targets? And then it's his responsibility to go out and meet them and present Anticimex and our M&A story. And then the M&A team, is involved in the execution of the actual transaction, but the ownership is entirely local. So his market expertise and the expertise of his team is kind of built into the whole M&A process. So we don't have anyone in Sweden trying to tell someone, in, for example, Malaysia, what company to acquire, and how to do it.
It's interesting. We can have a whole session on the culture around this by itself, but definitely I want to hear what you have to say, Martin, also.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to what Ola and Enrique said, in terms of the pitfalls and strategies. And I think if we look at scope deals and scale deals being more the traditional M&A, where you acquire a company for the purpose of growing your presence, and then you have cost synergies and potential sales synergies. But what I see now, as you saw, the shift where a lot of these large companies are trying to do scope deals, and what Enrique said, all of a sudden, whole new things comes into play. So you're acquiring smaller companies, more entrepreneurial companies, and you come as a big global enterprise to these entrepreneurial companies, and sometimes the expectations or the process doesn't really match. So the greatest pitfall that I would see a large company do is not tailor the M&A approach depending on if it's a scale deal or scope deal. It very much differs in terms of how you should approach a deal.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that's definitely what we've seen in my industry, where we've seen the bank has gone out and bought the fintechs and they just killed them.
Exactly.
And they try to grow them in-house and that doesn't work either.
Exactly.
So, and now they're just scared what will happen. Very, very interesting.
And you lose a lot of talent then, because I mean, if you take these entrepreneurial companies and you incorporate them straight into this larger bank, and with all the processes, etc., you have a big risk of losing key individuals. They're not signing up for that, and they'll just walk out the door, and part of the value that you just acquired goes out the door as well then.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because you have both the big company culture going with the small company, but you also have the Swedish culture going with the local culture. So it's a lot of different aspect to look at there. So I encourage everybody on the line, please pop your questions in, and we're happy for you to come online and have a chat. That's always nice to see new faces. So if you want to do that, please hold a hand up. Otherwise, write the questions and we'll read them out. And while you do so, I'm going to ask Martin, that we're too early in the year to ask what was going to happen next year. So I'm just going to ask in general, what would you like to see more of? What would you like to see Swedish companies come and do to really capture on the opportunity we sit on in the APAC region?
I would say, like I was alluding to in the presentation, I would like to see an increased focus on the region. I think during uncertain times, we do tend to move back and focus on the region close to us. So in Sweden's case, that would be Norway, Germany, UK. That would be Europe. And I think that's a mistake. I don't think we should focus only on the markets close to Sweden, because that's clearly not where the future growth lies.
Wait to see. It's interesting because are we thinking just ourselves where we are active, just active, not actually mergers and acquisitions, that it is some market are so foreign and we don't understand them so well, so you go like, it's so big, if we go in there we'd be swallowed and we won't come out again. And I feel that is a lot of the questions that I'm getting also, that how could I find a partner that is we actually suited for? Exactly.
And if I may add also, I think what we do see in the region as well is that now when we have an increase of regionalization and a need to become more domestic or more local, because a lot of these governments are now trying to strengthen their domestic capabilities. I think if we look at Swedish companies, a lot of Swedish companies now need to start to think about which market in the region are our focus markets, and then start to build up more sustainable footprint in that region, really tap into the local ecosystem, really trying to become a domestic capability, so to speak, really try to embed yourself in those key markets. That's what I would like to see going forward, and I think that's a necessity for a lot of Swedish companies. The old model, if we look at the old globalization model, was to have mega factories, 2 or 3 globally, and then just have sales offices scattered around the world. That's not gonna hold. You need to be embedded into those key markets that you want to focus on.
I'd love to hear Enrique's response on this, because going back that you did it before and you do it now. Do you see that shift, the embedded shift?
Yeah, I mean, I think for so I mean, I can probably only refer to Electrolux here on this, is that we'll continue as a large company to chase both kind of large deals, but as well as smaller. There are many interesting technology companies in this region, additions that we can make to existing operations that we have. So for us, it's kind of very focused on that, and kind of we're not looking at those kind of, I mean, much more focused on those really value accretive ones that we can bolt onto existing operations rather than the very large. Of course, we'll keep looking at those, but mainly the kind of bolt-on opportunities, also in the after-sales area.
That's interesting. Ola, do you want to reflect on that also?
I think not specific. I think we have very little production and the manufacturing in that sense.
Yeah. Now, and the embedded one is, I guess it takes, I shouldn't say that one is harder or not, but it might be harder to find the idea and carry out for the right partner. Let's look, we have some questions here. This has to be like a fast answer, I should say, if you just hand up. See here. Is, in general, do you believe M&A is the right strategy to grow in APAC, or do you think organic growth is the way to go? So who thinks M&A? It's you guys, I'm asking.
From our perspective, I think we need to have a very healthy mix. So unless you have strong organic growth and high level of profitability and strong control over your business within the Anticimex model, you will not be able to do acquisitions. So acquisitions is not to be considered kind of a nice to have on top of anything, but you need to have the basics and the fundamentals to be right and strong. And then you need to have a healthy mix between organic and acquired growth.
Fully agree on that, Camilla. So for us, I mean, the areas that I chase in terms of kind of M&A growth is mainly where we have a good management team with good growth, good margins, that kind of gives us much more peace of mind that we can bolt on good companies on that. We will not be able to survive if we add kind of a target company to kind of not a successful operation. And we have a mix, right? So.
Yeah, and I fully agree to that as well. I mean, and that's what I mean with embeddedness. You know, you have your presence already, you build on that. And while Enrique focused then on niche players with some technology capabilities, that becomes, you know, increase Enrique's innovation and R&D footprint in that market as well. So it becomes important. But it shouldn't only be a M&A strategy. You need to have both.
So a clear strategy, but several ways to get there is sort of what I'm hearing, to have that, what are we acquiring, what do we want to do, but then still be open that it might be different parts and partner down to that route, but still have the resources and the growth to back that and build on.
So Camilla, it's almost like saying that you have a view of that, where do we want to be in, say, 3-5 years out, and say that certain of those gaps that you will have, is a channel or technology or whatever it might be, is addressed via M&A. So it's kind of a very kind of embedded part of your strategy.
Yep. Another question here from online: what management structure work well to ensure you maintain independence of the successful operating model of a founder startup or entrepreneurial business acquired by a large organization? How do you resist the temptation to integrate?
I can go first. So we don't resist the temptation to integrate. We integrate all the businesses that we acquire. What we do is that we need to agree with the entrepreneur early on in the acquisition process what their future role will look like. So sometimes they are, you know, key to their small business, but would not really be key for us because we're acquiring a portfolio of customer contracts and a strong team of service technicians. But we may not need that entrepreneur. Other entrepreneurs are very keen on joining and finding a position with us, and it can be at any level of the organization. So I think the key for us to be successful is to set the expectations right and then deliver on whatever it is that we agree on with the entrepreneur during the transaction phase. And I think where we could go wrong and have gone wrong in some instances is when we have an agreement on the future role of the entrepreneur, and either we or the entrepreneur walk back on that commitment, and that is when a transaction can go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's two totally different mindsets also. If you're an entrepreneur and you're coming into a global company and what you're set to deliver or not.
Yeah, but it's clear that we need to be very clear set the right expectations. So when they join, you know, we need to deliver on those expectations. It needs to be fully in line with what we have communicated before. And it's our responsibility to make sure that they actually understand what it would be like to work in a global company as opposed to being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, coming back.
Camilla, and I think setting those expectations that Ola refers to is very important, especially around what's the operating freedom that you will essentially have, and you really, you know, have to get to a lot of details on that. But this is why I think kind of the model that Ola was referring to around saying is the Malaysian GM that is having a lot of those conversations, because it's, at the end of the day, it will be very difficult to sit from whether it's Singapore or Stockholm to say this is exactly how we will operate in any given market. So I think those conversations, especially around value creation model, are then really, really important. We want you to, you know, you're filling this gap in our strategy, and here's how the synergy plan that we want to work with you on is looking like.
Yeah, it's an exciting space, and everybody is excited when you get together and you created that partnership. But I think it means very different things. Have a Swedish culture, communicating on what freedom is in an organization, and then being a different whatever country you're acquiring in. So I can see the challenge, but also how much success can come from it if you get it right. More on culture here. How do you see culture fit as a success factor during M&A? We have seen great M&A deals happening for the right reason, but failed during execution and integration. I think that it sort of ties to what we talked about, but Martin, maybe you want to add something here.
Well, coming back to it again, depends on if it's a scope or scale deal. So if you have a scale deal and you have, based on the valuation, identify some cost synergies, then obviously you need to integrate and you need to make sure that you actually take those cost synergies out of the case. So it becomes, so the deal, works. At the same time, if you're doing a scope deal, as Enrique mentioned, and you're focusing on tech or digital capabilities, then of course it's extremely important to create a win-win for the parent company or the small startup, because like I said, I mean, you risk losing key individuals, and if you lose key individuals, basically a lot of the value of the acquisition then walks out the door. So that's extremely important. At the same time, if you're acquiring one of these small niche technology players, it's important the reason for acquiring that company is to use the parent, scale and global reach to scale out those solutions. So again, it's coming back to what the strategic imperatives are with the acquisition. And I would also like to say that some companies, Swedish companies, they have created a VC arm to their existing business. So they're not integrating the companies yet. They're taking a stake, they are watching and learning, and when they see it fits and makes sense, then they bring them in. So it's another way of exactly. It's another way of approaching scope investment.
And it's the same as well, keeping the culture as well as we talked about before. So can you share the views on Australia as a destination for future investment? What makes it more and what makes it less attractive to invest in a global or regional comparison?
The sheer fact is that Australia is the world's 30th largest economy. So it's a sizable economy. At the same time, if you look at growth for the last 30 years, Australia holds the record in consecutive quarters of growth. So it's quite significant. It's been growing faster and even to a value than Indonesia since the 1990s. So it's very much I would say a mature market in a sense that you have, rule of law, you have all that sophisticated market. At the same time, it is still an emerging market in a sense, because it behaves and it grows like an emerging market.
It's almost, I think that you are biased on this question that you're Good. I think we're sort of coming to an end. Have I answered all the question, Camilla? Has something? No, I think I've answered.
We have sorry, Camilla, we have in the chat a question as well. And then, just in the chat, did you see that one?
China has become even more challenging now after COVID with Mr. Xi's protectionist agenda. What is your view on acquiring in China now and in the future?
I can go first. I mean, we have done a lot of homework on China in the last couple of years and visited China on multiple occasions. But I think it's in many ways a less accessible market. It was already before the pandemic than most other neighboring markets. So we have a wait and see approach, I would say, on China, and kind of very closely monitoring how the market develops. But we are not in a position to make an acquisition, this time.
So I would say for sure it has been protectionist having that approach for quite some time. But I would say in many industries it's quite open, right? So in many consumer industries, it is possible to actually do deals. It has to be prepared for much more red tape than probably anywhere else in the world. But I mean, for both, I mean, speaking on, times with ASA or with Electrolux, it has been possible to do deals, and we continue looking at it as quite an attractive market to bolt on companies on via the acquisitions. Also, I mean, there is a lot of debate around joint ventures that you need to do and so on. It is possible to make it successful. We bought out a joint venture partner last year, and have had quite a good ride with that, and we'll be continue looking at it. So we don't really see that protectionism. China is a big exporter of appliances, so for our industry, it's quite an open market.
It's probably one that's very different depending on what industry you sit in and how regulated it is, and what the government has for interest in it. Martin, do you want to add some last comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, two things. We have seen successful acquisitions in China, so I think that's important to stress. At the same time, I think my advice going into China would be to really look at the different regions. You don't need to tackle the whole of China at once. You can just focus on some of the regions, and focusing on the Shanghai region, it's a pretty significant market as is. So a regional approach.
I love that answer, because that's what I normally say when people come and talk about Southeast Asia. So that apply that next time people ask about China. Spot on, Martin. This has been a pleasure. So thank you very much, Camilla, for asking me to do this. Jens, thank you very much for engaging in this conversation. Thank you very much, audience. I'm going to hand back to the other Camilla.
Thank you so much, Camilla, and thank you so much, Ola, Enrique, and Martin, for sharing all the insight about the M&A in the region. Very interesting. I have recorded this, as you might have noticed, and we will share this between all the chambers in the Asia Pacific as well, for to come back to in the future. But thank you so much, everybody, and have a good evening or afternoon or morning in Sweden. And look out for next Swedish Chambers Asia Pacific online events. We do organize events which we regularly share between all the chambers, which is a fantastic network, and it's a great benefit for members across Asia Pacific. So thank you once again, and look forward to seeing you again soon.